Let's leave that story now and move to another one. This time, a former Mozambican finance minister, the one known as Manuel Chang, has been handed over to United States officials and is expected to face fraud and corruption charges.
Chang is facing charges for his alleged involvement in a $2 billion hidden debt scandal.
The former finance minister of Mozambique, Manuel Chang, has been convicted on U.S. charges for his involvement in a $2 billion bond fraud.
Imagine waking up to find that your country is officially bankrupt. Not because of a war, a natural disaster, or a global pandemic, but because one man sat in a quiet office and signed a piece of paper. One signature. That's all it took to plunge 30 million people into a decade of poverty, wipe out 12% of a nation's GDP, and ignite a financial crisis that the world is still trying to untangle today. Most people think of bank robberies as men in masks with guns, but the most effective thieves wear suits, have government titles, and use the global financial system as their weapon of choice. This isn't just a story about a bad investment. It's a masterclass in how a single elite fixer can weaponize sovereign debt to rob an entire nation in broad daylight. This is the story of Manuel Chang, the tuna bonds, and the heist that bankrupted Mozambique. To understand how one man can destroy a country, you have to look at the world the way the 0.01% see it. For most of us, $2 billion is an unfathomable amount of money. But for a high-level government official sitting at the nexus of international banking and sovereign power, it's just a line item. Manuel Chang was the finance minister of Mozambique from 2005 to 2015. During that time, Mozambique was actually a success story. It was one of the world's 10 fastest-growing economies. International donors and the IMF loved the place. It was the rising star of Africa, a beacon of development after years of civil war. But Manuel Chang knew something the rest of the world didn't. When a country is rising, it becomes the perfect target for a grand-scale predatory scam. Because growth creates the illusion of safety, and safety is the best cover for a thief. The early 2000s were a gold rush for Mozambique. Massive offshore gas fields had just been discovered, promising to turn one of the poorest countries on Earth into a global energy powerhouse. This gas fever made the global elite drool. Everyone wanted a piece of the action. This is the first step in the scam, the bait. If you want to steal billions, you first have to convince the world that you're about to be worth trillions. The promise of future gas wealth made international banks willing to ignore the red flags they would normally see in a developing nation. They weren't looking at the current reality, they were looking at the future profits, and Manuel Chang was the man holding the keys to that future. The scam began with a dream, or at least the perfect illusion of one. Between 2013 and 2014, 3 brand new Mozambican state-owned companies were created: Proindicus, Imatum, and MAM. On paper, their mission was noble, even patriotic. Proindicus was for coastal surveillance, Imatum was for tuna fishing, and MAM was for building shipyards. Mozambique has a massive, beautiful coastline, so the pitch was easy. We're going to protect our waters from pirates, stop illegal fishing, and build a world-class tuna industry that will feed our people and fill our treasury. It sounded like the perfect way to turn natural resources into national wealth. But in reality, these companies weren't built to catch fish. They were built to catch billions in debt. They were shell companies designed to bypass the law and funnel money into private pockets. Every heist needs an architect and a crew. In this case, the crew was a collection of blue-chip international players. You had the Emirati-Lebanese shipbuilding company called Privinvest, led by the late Iskandar Safa, and you had some of the most prestigious names in global banking, Credit Suisse and VTB Capital. These weren't some back-alley loan sharks. These were the gatekeepers of the global economy. They approached the Mozambican government with a proposal that was engineered to be irresistible. They would provide the ships, the high-tech surveillance systems, and the billion-dollar loans to pay for it all. The catch? The loans had to be sovereign guarantees. This is the technical heart of the scam. A sovereign guarantee is essentially a co-signature from a nation. It tells the bank, if these fishing companies fail, the taxpayers will pay back every single cent. It turns a private business risk into a public obligation. Usually, a deal like this would have to go through a rigorous public process. It would have to be debated in Parliament, checked by the administrative court, and reported to the IMF. But Manuel Chang decided to skip all of that. As finance minister, he signed the guarantees in total secrecy. He didn't tell his own government. He didn't tell the international donors who were funding the country's budget. He just signed his name on 3 separate occasions, putting 30 million Mozambicans on the hook for $2 billion in secret debt. The bankers at Credit Suisse and VTB knew exactly what they were doing. Internal emails revealed later showed that compliance staff at Credit Suisse had raised massive red flags. They described the contractor, Privinvest, as a master of kickbacks, and noted that the risk of corruption was extremely high. But the deal team inside the bank, the ones who stood to make millions in commissions, ignored the warnings. They took steps to deliberately conceal the kickbacks from their own compliance department. They even agreed to reduce their arrangement fees if the savings were paid directly to the bankers as bribes. This is the institutional scam. It's not just one bad apple. It's an entire system where the incentives are aligned to reward fraud as long as it's buried deep enough in the paperwork. Why would a finance minister secretly sell his country into debt slavery? The answer is as old as time: a $7 million bribe. That was Manuel Chang's price. While he was sentencing his country to a financial meltdown, he was allegedly meeting with the master of kickbacks to discuss the logistics of his payoff. U.S. prosecutors later revealed a trail of digital breadcrumbs showing how the money was moved. It wasn't just a suitcase of cash, it was a sophisticated money laundering operation. The bribe was wired through U.S. banks to European accounts, masked as consulting fees or contractor payments. Chang wasn't the only one getting a piece of the pie. Over $200 million of that loan was diverted as bribes and kickbacks to other Mozambican officials, their families, and even the bankers themselves. The tuna bonds weren't a development project. They were a looting operation disguised as a maritime fleet. The scale of the overpricing was astronomical. An independent audit by Kroll, one of the world's top investigative firms, found that the boats and equipment provided by Privinvest were worth only a fraction of the $2 billion borrowed. Some estimates suggest the equipment was overpriced by as much as $700 million. Imagine your government taking out a loan for a fleet of Ferraris and actually receiving a bunch of rusted-out Toyotas, while the difference is split between the car salesman, the banker, and the government official who signed the check. That is exactly what happened to Mozambique. The tuna fleet was left to rot in the harbor because the country didn't even have enough money for the fuel or the trained crews to operate them. The boats were a fishy symbol of a fraud that was hidden in plain sight. The fallout was catastrophic, and for the people of Mozambique, it was personal. In 2016, the House of Cards finally collapsed. The Wall Street Journal broke the story of the hidden debt, and the world realized that Mozambique owed billions that weren't on the books. The reaction from the global community was immediate and brutal. The IMF and the international donors, who were providing hundreds of millions of dollars in aid every year, were furious about being lied to. They immediately halted all funding. For a nation like Mozambique, which relied on that aid for nearly a quarter of its budget, this was the equivalent of having its oxygen cut off in the middle of a marathon. The economy didn't just stumble, it disintegrated. The national currency, the Medi-Cal, lost 50% of its value in a matter of months. Inflation skyrocketed, making the price of bread and fuel unaffordable for the average citizen. Public services were gutted, schools ran out of books, and hospitals ran out of medicine. Between 2015 and 2019, public spending per person was cut in half. An entire lost decade of growth was wiped out by a single financial heist. It's estimated that at least 2 million Mozambicans were pushed below the poverty line because of the debt crisis. While Manuel Chang was reportedly enjoying luxury villas and obscene luxury vehicles, the people he was supposed to protect were literally starving. The total cost to the country has been estimated at over $11 billion, nearly the entire GDP of Mozambique at the time the scandal broke. The scam also had a massive impact on the country's political security. The hidden debt scandal didn't just break the economy, it broke the people's trust in their government. It fueled internal conflicts and weakened state institutions. Governance quality plummeted as the regime focused more on covering up the crime than on leading the nation. It turned a rising star into an authoritarian state struggling with instability. This is the true legacy of the macro scam. It doesn't just steal money, it steals the democratic future of a nation. But the most fascinating part of this scam isn't how it started, but how justice finally caught up with the master of kickbacks. In late 2018, as Manuel Chang was flying through South Africa on his way to Dubai, he was intercepted by authorities on a U.S. warrant. The United States government got involved because the scam used U.S. banks and defrauded U.S. investors who had bought the tuna bonds on the secondary market. Chang spent 5 long years in a South African prison, fighting tooth and nail to be sent back to Mozambique, where he likely would have faced a friendly trial and a quick pardon. But the legal system held firm. In 2023, he was finally extradited to New York. In the summer of 2024, Manuel Chang finally had his day in a Brooklyn court. The trial was a window into the dark soul of global finance. Prosecutors presented evidence of the secret meetings, the coded emails, and the millions in bribes that bought Chang's signature. They showed how he betrayed his fiduciary duty to his people to line his own pockets. On August 8, 2024, a federal jury convicted him of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. And on January 17, 2025, Manuel Chang was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. In court, he stood before the judge and said he was sorry, claiming he was very disgusted with his conduct. But for the millions of people whose futures he sold for a $7 million bribe, sorry doesn't pay for the schools that weren't built or the medicine that never arrived. He was also ordered to forfeit the $7 million he had pocketed. The banks didn't escape entirely either. Credit Suisse eventually agreed to pay over $475 million in fines to US and UK authorities to settle charges of fraud and corruption. They also had to forgive $200 million of the debt Mozambique still owed. But let's be real. For a bank that makes billions, a few hundred million is just a compliance tax. It's the cost of doing business. The real victims are the people of Mozambique, who are still paying off the remainder of the billions in debt that Manuel Chang secretly signed for. The Mozambique story is a chilling reminder of how the global financial system is rigged. It wasn't just one corrupt man in Africa. It was a network of bankers in London, shipbuilders in the Middle East, and investors in New York, all profiting from the destruction of a developing nation. It raises a massive question about the world we live in. Is the system actually broken, or is it working exactly how it was designed? I want to hear from you guys in the comments. If you were given the chance to sign a paper that would give you $7 million, but potentially bankrupt your neighbor, where would you draw the line? Or is everyone's price just a matter of having enough zeros? Let me know below. If you want to see another example of how the elite use financial engineering to buy themselves immunity and control the world from the shadows, you have to watch my video on the Jeffrey Epstein scam. Just like Manuel Chang, Epstein wasn't just a predator. He was a financial architect who knew exactly how to manipulate the cracks in the global banking system to stay untouchable for decades. He used the same playbook of shell companies, offshore accounts, and exclusive consulting to siphon billions from the ultra-wealthy while building a shield of perceived value that kept him safe for years. You can find that video right here on the end screen. If you want to understand how deep these types of deceptions go and how they've evolved over centuries, you need to see how the old school scammers did it before the internet even existed. You should check out my last video. The Nigerian prince scam is 128 years old, because it shows that while the technology changes, the psychology of the scam stays exactly the same. It's the same greed, the same lies, and the same predators. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark side of the economy, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who still thinks the financial system is fair, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next heist. We're going to keep pulling back the curtain on the people who run the world from the shadows. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next one.